Welcome to our story. So we spent quite some time on building slides. Fortunately, we're not the only ones having cool slides, so that's cool. So we have a couple of topics to talk about. So first of all, we're going to explain a little bit what primary refresh tokens are and how they are used. We're going to explain a little bit more about the new protocol versions that we found during our research that may be different than the Microsoft website. So yes, they're not even documented. Then we're going to highlight the secure enclave a little bit, which is basically the TPM implementation on macOS. We're not going to drop 0 days. At least, we didn't even think we had a 0 day up until we submitted it to Microsoft, and then they wanted to have a phone call. So it turns out it was, in their opinion, a critical one, so we can't demo and explain everything. We're going to show you some stuff that still works and is interesting, but not everything until it's patched, which is probably somewhere next year, maybe. And that's primarily because it involves all operating systems and the implementations there, so that's complicating it a little bit for them. So I'm Olaf. Of course, I like warm hugs fixed with Disney. And I'm a security researcher and detection engineer at Falcon Force. And I'm on Twitter. And I'm joined with Dirk-Jan.
Hi, I'm Dirk-Jan. I have my own company called Outsider Security. I've been doing that for 2.5 years. I like to research weird protocols. Not so weird protocols, maybe all of these things are standardized. So I like diving into basically all the modern Microsoft products. Been researching Entra since 4 or 5 years when it was still called the good old Azure AD. I also have a Twitter account if you want to keep up with the new research that I'm publishing there. You're more than welcome to. So actually, our story started quite a while ago because we were talking about primary refresh tokens, and Olaf was like, well, you're all talking about Windows, but I also have a Mac here, and I don't know how it works over there. I was like, well, I don't know how Mac works, so maybe we can do it together, and Olaf knows how Mac works. I know a thing or two about tokens. And we did that like in the end of 2022. We found some interesting protocol versions. We worked on implementing them, and then we were kind of laying it, or we left it around for a while. Basically, we're both quite busy. We don't see each other every week. So we decided to submit it for a conference, and at that point, the talk was accepted. So we were like, well, now we kind of need to finalize it, make these slides and stuff. So then we basically wrapped up the research in April or May of this year. And then we found out that actually Microsoft released a completely new version, like 2 weeks before we looked at it again. So we could kind of go back to square one and look at the new protocol version, which was entirely different from anything we've seen before. So this is also where we found out the new version, coded it, reported it to Microsoft, and also added the support for the tools for it. And now we can talk about most of it, but again, some of the stuff is still being worked at by Microsoft. And we wrapped this up in this nice little storybook.
Yeah, so of course every story needs some characters, right? So we have our quick fix Quinn, who's implementing code that may be us or that may be Microsoft. That's not that relevant now. Then we have our main character probably, who's the pathfinder that actually wants to navigate Entra ID and find all the nice paths that we can actually utilize. Then we have Sir Block-a-Lot. He wants to build dams because he wants to protect everything or keep stuff from leaking. And then we have our Kingfisher, who actually loves fishing, of course. So from there, we started a lot of research. There is some prior research that we encountered sort of after we found our own stuff and started Googling if other people did. Thomas Naunheim from Glucania, he is also quite a really good researcher. He found some stuff, how to replay some of the PRTs that he found on his Mac, and he wrote that up, so it's definitely worth looking at this blog. And just to get everybody in the same mindset, we want to kind of highlight the basics of the PRTs. We're not going to explain everything because we don't want to fry your brain too much. But essentially how tokens and authentication works on unmanaged Windows hosts, that's quite important. So we have our user, and our user wants Teams access, right? So he signs in to Teams. Teams will actually request tokens from Entra ID, which will be an access token and a refresh token, and then uses that refresh token against Entra again to get access tokens to the Teams backend, and maybe other access tokens to Exchange and SharePoint. And it's important to note the difference where a refresh token can request an access token, and access token is only for one specific use.
Yeah, so this is on unmanaged hosts, and these are basically the standard OAuth protocols. However, if you are on a managed Windows device, then the flow gets a little bit more complicated, because you don't want to sign users into each app individually, have each app manage their own tokens, have everything asynchronously sign out, all that kind of things. So on Windows, the user doesn't sign into apps, they actually sign into the device. And that means that when they sign in, LSAS will take those credentials, and LSAS is going to request our primary refresh token. And the primary refresh token is a single sign-on token. So once that is in our session, it will be valid to sign in to basically anything that's also running on our device. So if the user starts Teams, and Teams in this case is acting as a OAuth client, Teams will actually ask the broker for some tokens. So in this case, Teams is not directly authenticating to Entra. It's actually asking the broker to do that on Windows or on other operating systems, because they also work with a token broker. And the token broker is asking LSAS, hey, can I use this PRT? LSAS is going to do some cryptography, and it's going to actually send the correct PRT, basically assertion, so something is signed by LSAS. That's being used to talk to Entra. Entra gives out the tokens, the broker gives the tokens to Teams, and that is how Teams basically can access all of its services that it needs to do. So instead of Teams doing the refresh token dance directly, it's asking LSAS to use the PRT, and in that way it can do the same thing as any other app can do in our session. So just some facts about these primary refresh tokens. We're going to cover this in the whole talk, so this is kind of important. So primary refresh tokens are single sign-on tokens. So once you have one of these, you can sign into anything that your account can also sign in. So it can be a website, it can be a native app, it can be like a CLI. Basically, it is a true single sign-on token. The primary refresh token is also the mechanism in which a user identity is linked to a device identity. So if you are familiar with how Microsoft 365 works, very often you see conditional access policies that require a certain device state, like the device being compliant or hybrid joined. And that is also done through the same primary refresh token mechanism. So the primary refresh token is tied to a user and also tied to a device. Now, a primary refresh token is obviously very powerful, so that's why it needs a session key to operate. So that's like a cryptographic key that proves that we are authorized to use this primary refresh token. And these session keys, because they are so sensitive, they will be protected by a trusted platform module on Windows, secure enclave on macOS, as we'll see in a little bit. And that also binds the PRT to a device. So even if your system on a modern Windows device, you'll not be able to steal these kind of tokens. So because PRTs are single sign-on tokens, they fit kind of in this token hierarchy. So at the top we have a primary refresh token, of which we only have like one or two. And with primary refresh tokens, we can request regular refresh tokens or access tokens. Refresh tokens are there per app, and access tokens are there per service that each app is accessing. So we have more access tokens than refresh tokens, and we have more refresh tokens than primary refresh tokens. So there's also a few protocol versions. On Windows, basically what we have is PRT version 2. And Windows is, of course, the platform that is fully controlled by Microsoft, so they can make it in any way they want. But on other operating systems, they don't have all the same controls. They sometimes have to rely a bit on what the operating system offers. So especially on macOS, they had to kind of roll with whatever implementation Apple was doing and not have their own full control. So to accommodate that, they made a PRT version 3, and they also introduced like a new PRT version that's actually not tied to a device. So how does the device actually get a PRT in the first place? And this is all, again, going to be related to a lot of crypto. So whenever a device is registered in Entra, it's going to generate a private key. It's going to generate a public key based on that private key, and those are RSA keys. With these keys, it's going to do the device registration, which means that the device will get a certificate, and it's also getting a transport key for like extra security during the transport. This is very similar on macOS, so the biggest difference is that on Windows it's going to send this as a bcrypt RSA blob, which is like a Windows internal structure, and on macOS it's actually using this JSON Web Key standard, which means that the RSA key is presented as a JSON structure. And the specifications for this are written by somebody who used to work at Microsoft called Michael Jones. We'll see his name a few more times because he's involved a lot in all of these OAuth specifications or all the other specifications surrounding this. So how does a PRT work on Windows schematically? So whatever we do, we start with some kind of authentication material. It can be a password, it can be something like a FIDO key. And with that, we authenticate to our Windows device. And at this point, our Windows device will send a signed payload to Entra. So it signs with the private key of the device. So we prove that it is actually this device that is issuing this PRT request. The device then receives a primary refresh token and a transport key encrypted session key. So the session key is not in plain text, it's actually encrypted with the transport key, which also ties it to our 3PM, so it's actually tied to the hardware of the device. Now once we have this session key, then we can start using the primary refresh token. So we sign a payload with the session key, we send that to Entra. Then Entra is going to give us a token for a specific app, for example, for Teams. But again, this is going to be encrypted, and it's going to use the session key to decrypt that payload. It's going to be encrypted with a standard called JWE, or JSON Web Encryption. So it's related to the JSON Web Token standard, but it's actually encrypted. So that's how it works on Windows. On macOS, however, it's quite a bit more complicated. And you see in this slide, on the top right, there's this little sunny symbol. And this you'll see on a few more slides. And it essentially means that this is one of the key slides of this talk. So there's quite a few complex things here in the presentation, but if you need to remember a few slides, it must be these slides. So pay attention there. The rest you can sort of sleep or read them afterwards. But basically on macOS, the procedure looks as follows. So we still log in. So we use our credentials to authenticate. And in this case, it's not going to directly send that to Entra, but it's actually following the authorization code flow, which is standard OAuth flow. In this case, it's using that with a specific client. And it's actually sending a on-the-fly generated transport key to Entra. So there's no device yet at this point. We haven't registered our device yet, which means that the primary refresh token that we receive is not going to be bound to a device. After that, it's actually gonna register the device. So now we have a device. Then it's sending the first PRT plus a payload that is signed with the private key of our device. So we prove now that this was requested by a real device. We send that to Entra. Then we get back a new PRT, and this is called a device-bound PRT because it's linked to our device. Plus, again, a session key that is encrypted with our transport key. And with that, we can again request tokens. So you see that there's essentially two different primary refresh tokens involved. There is this first primary refresh token that's actually not linked to a device because the device registration happens afterwards. And there's a second primary refresh token that is actually device bound, and that is linked to like our macOS device specifically. And this is all possible with the PRT protocol version 3.
Yeah, so the biggest difference here, and I think my mic is at some point joining, is two implementations that we actually looked at. So this is back in 2022, when version 4 wasn't a thing yet. Basically, we started with Edge. So Edge on Mac allows you to sign in and then join the tenant that you're part of, only for Edge, and then you have SSO within Edge for all the things that you want to access, right? So that's where the deviceless PRT first came on our radar. The second version is if you want to be a little bit more in control of your Mac users, and manage them. Actually, you can use Intune. There's other products, of course. And for this, Microsoft built their own SSO extension that you need to install. And this will actually generate that device-bound PRT that you saw in the previous slide. So if we would go back, so that left bit, the PRT plus the transport key only, that's basically the deviceless version, which will be used by Edge. The bottom one over here will be used by Intune. So there are two different PRTs. Sometimes they might still live on the same system. So that's something, if you're an attacker, that this could be interesting to look at, because they are differently protected. In our discussions with Microsoft, we also learned that there are other platforms doing similar stuff, like Android, iOS, all kinds of other obscure OSs maybe as well. But we didn't really look at it because we were already distracted enough by this. So on Edge, if you start logging on as a user in Edge, so not via the browsing methodology, but like for the application itself, you would see a similar flow as you would see from a lot of other OAuth flows, but you also get a PRT back. So basically how that works, as Dirk-Jan explained earlier, is you log on, you get a authorization code, which you receive from that flow. It will on the fly generate that RSA key, and it will receive a primary refresh token back from the Entra portal with the session key, right? And from there, it will actually start using that, which is RSA encrypted, and you get like all these tokens back. And then from there, it will actually start, you can actually start utilizing this. So yeah, as I just mentioned, the PRT v3 flow for this is fairly similar to how it works on Windows, with probably the biggest distinction where macOS for the PRT3 flow, it will store it in the keychain together with the session key, as I'll show you in a second. Whereas on Windows, it will be used with the TPM if you have one. But the response is equally encrypted, and it has a session key to actually allow you to prove that you have access to it. And this is just a screenshot of how it looks. On the keychain, as I mentioned, it's stored in your local keychain. If you have an iCloud enabled account, it will be in your iCloud, which has additional risks, of course, if you can imagine if you get phished on that. And basically, it is protected, so you can show password, and then you get a password prompt. So you still need to have the user X password if you are attacking this user. But usually you can fish for that, right? And then you get this JSON blob that you see in there. And if you would look at that, you would see the secret, which is your PRT, and then the session key where you can basically start using this. So you can start replaying this. I forgot to click. Of course, Dirk-Jan built road tools and road TX. So we can also use this to actually get our tokens this way. And of course, this is very sensitive, so it's a very hard thing to do. This is probably the biggest OST that we're going to release for you today. Everybody can copy paste, of course. That's
yeah. So on Windows, it's tied to all kind of like hardware capabilities. On macOS, it's just like in the keychain, it just says session key. You copy paste it out on any device that you want, and then it also works there. So you can just copy paste the single sign-on out to wherever you want. That is the v3 implementation. So we figured this out, and we thought like, okay, this is how it works. This is where it ends. And then we were just doing it again to see if we could still reproduce it, just to make sure that Microsoft didn't change the implementation. And they did change the implementation. We suddenly saw like PRT protocol version 4, and we're like, what is this? Why is this there? So it turns out to be the new platform SSO. And I think you're actually going to talk about the platform SSO here.
Yeah, so this is a fairly recent thing. It was in preview for a while. I think they released it maybe 3-4 months ago, where Intune now has the capability to use the platform SSO module, which is actually leveraging the Apple native SSO extension that runs from the operating system. So this is not Microsoft developed. They're just piggybacking off actual Mac OS implementation. And the cool thing here is it's actually really nice. So they're leveraging this basically through Intune. You can say, okay, I want to use this or that. So you could use the old plugin, or you can now also use the platform extension. And here it will be actually a similar implementation as Windows has, where they're also utilizing the Mac version of a TPM chip. And that has quite a lot of benefits. And in our research, it kind of looked like that even the Mac implementation looks safer than the Windows one, which is kind of ironic. So in Apple terms, the secure enclave is what would be a TPM. The implementation is similar, slightly different. And because they control the full ecosystem from hardware to software, they have some benefits there where they don't have to make it compatible with all kinds of CPU vendors. So if you were really into this stuff, I don't understand the half of it, but there is a really good support article on the Apple website that explains in detail how this chip works and how you can interoperate with it. And it's just quite a nifty implementation. So basically on the Intune side, you can build your own onboarding profiles. And here you can actually select that use secure enclave key. And that is the new feature that they added. You can enable or disable the shared device key. Please disable that because it's not the best thing to enable. Then it gets uploaded to your iCloud and it actually lowers the security barrier. And the rest is just padding that you have to sign it. And then once you enroll your Mac into Intune, which is just a company portal like you would on Windows, it's happy. It shows all kinds of stuff. And then after that, actually the important stuff begins, because now the trust or the platform SSO module from Apple kicks in. So first you have to register your device in Intune, and then it goes into the second phase, where you have to re-authenticate with your local admin account. And of course you can automate this as well if you want to have a better user experience. And it actually starts probing you as well for a passkey. And the passkey, again, is tied to the secure enclave. So it's a device-bound flow that you're following, and basically you're allowing the company portal to utilize that to get into the nicer bits of crypto.
All right. So the device registration, if you have a secure enclave, is going to look slightly different than if you don't. So it is again going to be a API request. So if you have watched some of my previous talk on device registration, it's going to look very similar. We're just going to send a token to Entra. And in the request that we see the certificate signing request and also the transport key being uploaded. But the biggest difference is that this implementation actually uses elliptic curve keys. So they're no longer RSA keys, but they're now elliptic curve keys. Same goes for the transport key. So it's being uploaded as a JSON web key blob. So we just see the key, the public values of the key, and of course the private part of the key remains on the device here in this case in the secure enclave. And then we get back a certificate, and in the certificate we also see that it's done with like elliptic curve keys, so with a very specific curve. So if we look at PRT3 versus PRT4, then we see that PRT3 uses RSA keys. However, the PRTv4 used the secure enclave-based keys, and I guess that it was not Microsoft's decision to use elliptic curve, but it was Apple's decision because they want to use this with their secure enclave, and the secure enclave uses ECC keys basically natively. So it was probably Apple kind of nudging them or maybe forcing them to actually go this way with the PRTv4. And it also means that the PRTv4 is slightly different. So the starting point to get a PRTv4 is again going to be this deviceless PRT. So it still does the deviceless PRT first. Maybe there's a flow to do it differently, to like start with a PRTv4 PRT, but we only saw like the upgrade happening from v3 to v4. We didn't look at how the other authentication flows work with like the passkey yet. So there's probably more to explore here. And again, you also see the sun in the corner. So this is again one of these important slides. And what it's going to do, it's going to send this PRTV3 kind of primary refresh token. Actually, it uses the primary refresh token to get a regular refresh token that's valid to request a PRT. And it's going to sign that with the device key. So it's using the elliptic curve digital signature algorithm. And it's also going to use a standard called elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman with inferior session keys, I believe. So actually, it's not going to use session keys in this case, but for every request, it's like going to do a Diffie-Hellman key exchange and create a temporary key. So when it receives the primary refresh token back, there's no session key involved here, but the response is actually going to be encrypted with the negotiated session key or temporary session key using the ECDH key exchange. And if we want to use it, then we actually have to, again, sign our request with the private key of the device. So that's different also from the PRTV3 and the PRTV2 flow, because these are not signed by the device. But in this case, we do sign it with the device private key. Again, we do this Diffie-Hellman key exchange to negotiate a key with Entra. And the response will get us our tokens, and the tokens will again be encrypted. So we need to decrypt this, and everything that is part of like this all decryption, either in this step or in this step, has to go via the secure enclave, because secure enclave is the one that actually holds the private keys. So the steps are actually very similar. Both of the steps, it's the device signing the request, and it's the response that is actually encrypted using elliptic curve keys. So how does this look on the wire? We see again a request, so it's the PRT version 4, and the request actually contains a JSON Web Token, and this JSON Web Token is generated by the device. So in the header we'll see the certificate from the device. So it's again the certificate that was issued to our device when we did the registration. And it's again the biggest difference here is that the algorithm changes to elliptic curve instead of RSA signatures. And then when we request a token or we receive the token back, then we see this encrypted blob. So this looks like a JSON Web Token, but again, this is not a JSON Web Token. This is JSON Web Encryption, or JWE. And in the header, we see all these like weird fields. I'm not a cryptography expert, but basically these are the initialization vectors for the elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman. And with all of this data, then you can basically negotiate a key. So I didn't come up with all of this. This is from a RFC. So it's about key agreement with elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman inferior static, or ECDA-ES. And then they use the concat KDF to basically generate a derived key, and the derived key is actually used as a encryption key. And guess who wrote this document? Michael Jones.
Good memory.
Very good. Or maybe you knew it already. So essentially that is how PRTV4 works.
Yeah, and it was kind of funny. Since he wrote most of the tools for PRT3, he started to build like a V4 version, started digging into the RFCs, and was, well, complaining a bit on how complicated it was. And then he built his first POC and he ran it, and it's like it worked. It's like completely dumbfounded that it's actually working, but it was cool to observe.
Yeah, so the biggest surprise during this whole research is that we could reproduce it in like Friday morning for some reason. So the RFCs were quite alright, and the documentation from Apple was also quite nice, giving examples, and like if you calculate the derived key, this is what the results should be. So it allowed us to create a proof of concept pretty quickly.
Yeah, for the people that ever developed for macOS, generally their development documentation is pretty terrible. This bit was amazingly documented. It was really good, or at least compared to the rest, right? So
it had just the important part that we needed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
let's not talk about the quality of
the rest of it was kind of meh. Still, the PRT is saved in the keychain, as with everything, or mostly everything on Apple, if it's implemented well. But there's one big distinction. So we can still look at it. If we fill in our password, we can see that the secret at least is there. There is some more protection on it. So they try to constrain access to it with entitlements and access controls. So technically only the Microsoft Identity SSO extension should be able to read this value. unless you're like a local user and you overwrite that. So it's already slightly more protected. On the keychain side, if we look what's in there, that's basically this blob. So we do see that secret, but the biggest thing that's now missing is the session key, since this is handled by the secure enclave. So as an attacker, I can copy this, but I can't do anything with it because I don't have the rest of the material to actually finish the authentication that you need to do with that whole flow from the device code side. So this is a small screenshot from the Microsoft website, and as we started with, it always needs a device ID and a session key, which turns out not to be accurate because we don't have a session key for the deviceless version, or we do have a session key for the deviceless version, but no device ID. And then for PRT4, it's the other way around, where the session key is derived from that Diffie-Hellman exchange. So we created this small table, and again a sun, because if you're looking at these kinds of things on the wire, or if you're analyzing it, it could be useful to sort of remember where it's coming from and what is actually the difference. The validity is the same. So also on the Microsoft website, it says the validity is 14 days, which is a blatant lie. They all work for 90 days, and that's going to be the same and will be the same probably forever. Right. So we do have one demo that is actually we were allowed to show you, and that's Dirk-Jan's.
Yes. So one of the interesting things is that the deviceless PRT, it started with a normal device code authentication flow. And a normal device authentication flow is just a standard OAuth flow. There's no magic involved in there. It's just like filling in specific parameters. You don't need to have a device. You don't need to have advanced crypto. So that means that we can actually also phish users to follow that flow using attacker in the middle phishing, for example, with Evil Jinx, and then actually use that to request a deviceless primary phish token. So we ask the user to sign in once, and normally you would get some cookies from that. Problem with cookies is that Microsoft is very keen at revoking those, and they're kind of a bit of like a black box because you don't know when your cookie is going to be valid, what the constraints are. However, we can also phish for deviceless PRTs, and deviceless PRTs, they're way more robust because Microsoft isn't just going to revoke them. They're valid for 90 days. We can renew them, and we can extend their validity, and we can even upgrade them to full primary phish tokens if we want. So, little demo. And here I've set up a local Evil Jinx instance. And I'm just gonna do it locally, so I don't actually own this Microsoft Zero line domain, even though it would be a nice name. So this is our victim. He's gonna visit our webpage. And I changed this fishlet to ask for a specific token. So we're gonna enter our username, enter the password. We're also prompting the victim for MFA, because then we will phish the MFA, and it also means that we have a token with MFA rights. And then here what we do is we pick up this code. So this is the authorization code. And the authorization code is normally exchanged by like a native app for a token. And most phishing sites, they will actually automatically exchange it or pick up the cookies or something like that. But here we want to have this code because first of all, this code can only be exchanged once. So if it's already exchanged, then we can't using it anymore. But this allows us to request a deviceless PRT. So from here on, we move it to the Linux machine with RoadTX. And that requests a deviceless PRT. And with this deviceless PRT, we can request arbitrary tokens for anything. So this would work in like native app scenarios, with browser scenarios as well. I could just pop up a browser and single sign on to anything. And this will keep working for like 90 days. If we want to add a device claim, because why not, then we can also register a device using this same device as PRT, because it's used as an input in the whole device registration flow. So the legit systems also use this device as PRT as a start of the flow. So if you want, we can also register a device, first of all, with this PRT. So that we do with the PRT auth module. We specify the version 3 because we are using this new protocol. You can actually also leave that out because the V2 works with the same PRTs. It's a different crypto involved, but it doesn't matter which protocol you use, V2 and V3 there. The things are exchangeable basically. We ask a token for the device registration service scope. And then after that, we register our fake device, and this device is obviously not going to have a TPM. We're gonna do the new registration flow. So this is gonna register a fake macOS device. It's gonna pretend we have a secure enclave. So it's gonna generate no RSA keys in this case, but elliptic curve keys. And then once we have this device, then we can upgrade this PRT to a PRT v4, a device-bound PRT. So this will bind it to our new device. And we see that the session key here is empty because this is PRT v4. So then we don't have a session key anymore, but we have a PRT that is bound to our device, and that we need to use these elliptic curve keys to actually use the PRTs. So the final step, we use it with the PRT auth module. We specify the version 4. So in this case, I'm asking for a token for graph.microsoft.com from my favorite application, Microsoft Teams. And then it will give us a token. And we'll see with this token, it's like on behalf of Teams. So with this, we will be able to extract any data from Teams. This is how it works with the native flow. There's also, of course, PRT v4 single sign-on tokens for the web-based flow. Those also work slightly differently than like the normal PRT authentication on websites. So I didn't have time to implement that yet, but it's possible because we have like a full primary refresh token bound to a specific device. Now, there's also some things that we can use on Windows with this. So there is some protocol magic that allows us to do some things we're not supposed to. But again, we were going to do this talk, and Microsoft asked us to, like, hey, can you give us a heads up what you're actually going to discuss? We didn't think it was a big thing. They wanted to fix it nonetheless, so we agreed not to talk about it until it's fixed. And I don't know when they're gonna fix it exactly. I know they're working on it. But basically, we're not going to be able to show you all the other stuff. But this works. This is just following the protocols. You can phish people, and instead of phishing for cookies, which is boring, everyone already does that, you can phish for primary refresh tokens. Way more fun. Little bit about defenses to wrap it up.
Yeah, of course. Like any responsible person dropping bad stuff, we also want to help you defend against it. Sad news is you can't fully. Like also Rick's talk is probably going to suck for a while, and then we're going to be better. But Microsoft offers some options. Some require licenses, some not so much. You can restrict it quite a bit with conditional access policies, depending on what you require on it. Quite complicated to do really, really well, and there will at some point maybe be a loophole. So you can supplement that with require only compliant devices, which is something you can check against. Bit stronger, still something that we probably will be able to fake as an attacker. Another thing you could do if you have that luxury is restrict your device registration to the maximum of 1 or 2. The way it works, if you use Intune, you enroll your own device, right? So you need to be able to at least register 1 device. But a lot of companies also allow you to log on with your phone. Maybe you have an iPad, right? So then you already have 3. So there are some gaps there as well. You can also, what you can also do is limit like the token lifetime on non-corporate, bring your own non-managed devices. So at least the scope and the impact might be slightly less. So if we get a PRT, then and we can use it, then at least we can use it for a shorter amount of time. So still not perfect. And of course, you can still build detections where a user is registering a new device from an already registered device, which is not really what you would expect in a normal onboarding flow. So all of them not great. Microsoft's actually working on patching the vulnerable flows that we weren't allowed to talk about. And also they're exploring mechanisms to disallow the reuse of certain of those tokens for device registration, which will probably be the biggest blocking point, because then you can't do all the stuff that we showed you earlier. And of course, there's a lot of other things to explore. So Mr. Jones wrote quite some other RSCs that we probably can still dig into and sometimes be frustrated about. And I already see somebody very waiting for us. So that will be the end. And we would like to thank you for your attention. questions is probably, is that still possible?
Really want to.
So,